This is Father Bonaventure Chapman.
And this is Father Gregory Pine.
And welcome to Godsplaining. Thanks to all those who support us. If you enjoy the show, please consider making a monthly or daily or minutely donation on Patreon. Do we have that option for minute donations?
No.
Oh, that's okay. We'll get there. Be sure to like and subscribe to Godsplaining wherever you listen to your podcasts. Father Gregory.
Hey.
Let's see. Okay, don't talk about the beard. So one of the things...
What's the name of that literary device where you mention a thing by saying you're not going to mention a thing? Like when you're coming at your political opponent, you say, like, I will not mention his many fraudulent venture capital experiments which have resulted in the loss of thousands of jobs, but I will not mention it, for that would be... what is that?
Yeah.
Preteridio, I think? Yeah, it's mentioned by exclusion.
I
think it's preteridio. Whatever.
That's probably right. Yeah, so preterizing. So I was thinking our listeners might know that. You've just come back from Switzerland.
True.
Or finished. You have to go back to defend and demand a doctorate from them in October.
To seize it from their hands.
But while you were over there, we tried to stay in touch through FaceTime and all this sort of things. And also, we had a project of reading books together from different worlds. So a lot of the literature episodes, the dear listener that you've listened to, are the results of us reading different world literatures and such. Now, we haven't asked like really people from those world cultures. We basically just went on Google, right, and typed in best novel in or best literature from China, Japan, France, this sort of thing. So we've been kind of going around that. What literature have you enjoyed the most? What country have you enjoyed the most?
Great question. Let's see.
We've done we've covered a lot, obviously. So we've read one book from a few countries. So let's just go ahead and say, what is your favorite literature in the entire world? It's like a Super Bowl thing.
Well, we have to remember what it is that we've read. So in the English language, we read Thomas Pynchon's Gravity is Rainbow, which is not going to be anyone's favorite book ever, unless that person... Never mind, I shouldn't make an ad hominem attack. That was weird. And then we read As I Lay Dying, which is a bizarre book, William Faulkner. Yeah. No idea what happened there, or the point of which, maybe that's the wrong question to ask. I feel like our Spanish foray, or Spanish language foray, our South American foray was good. 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez.
That's a fascinating book.
And then short stories by Jorge Maria Borges.
Luis Borges.
Okay.
Yeah, that was great.
I feel like the Spanish foray was a good one.
French foray was short, and we did Jean-Paul Sartre.
We did Nausea. Yeah,
Nausea.
However you pronounce it.
Yeah.
Word starts with an N.
Yeah.
Nausea. I feel like that was okay. That was kind of like this is a thing that people read. I understand why people read it. That being said, it's more of an assignment than it is of an enjoyment.
Yeah.
What else have we done? Have we done any German literature yet? No, we talked about doing Thomas Mann, Magic Mountain, or Joseph and His Brothers.
But I think we're going to do Goethe first, right? We want to do Faust. So that. And then we kind of British-Japanese, we did
right, we did a couple of Kazuo Ishiguro ones.
We
did Artist in the Floating World. Did we read anything else together?
Remains of the Day.
Remains of the Day, exactly.
Yeah. Artist in the Floating World is spectacular.
Yeah.
We did an episode, I think.
We did do
Ishiguro,
that episode.
Right? Yeah. Because you read, That
was the first episode that we recorded at our first recording session, and as a result of which we hadn't yet figured the technology, so it was like us going like, so there was a lot of skipping in the video track. We still posted it though.
Oh, you better believe we did. Who cares? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we used to be on tops of Rubbermaid tubs. So this is great. Yeah. Okay, So and then we haven't done any Chinese literature or Japanese literature really. Memoirs of a Geisha we should read at some point. Or something. Maybe Shogun. That's not really Japanese.
Oh, we did. Did we also do? What did we do? We did demons. So we did Russian.
Oh, we did Russian. Yeah.
Or the possessed.
I need to do more. I need to do. Oh, we did Anna Karenina.
We did Anna Karenina.
Yeah,
that's right, dude.
And I have to teach War and Peace because I'm using Tolstoy for my art class. Philosophy of art class. I'm not teaching art. This coming fall.
Happy Clouds?
Yeah, Happy Clouds. Happy Clouds. We haven't done Icelandic. We haven't done that. If there's any people can send in suggestions for things.
Drop a comment, suggest a good book. We'll probably read it, and we'll have an episode on it in 9 months.
Yeah. Have we done anything from Africa yet?
No. I think we talked about doing Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart or whatever it's called.
Yeah.
Man, I just can't come down with any answers with any precision.
That's pretty good though. That's pretty close. No, you're doing fine. Your imprecision is better than most people's precision. All right. So, but why I started this because we haven't mentioned one country that we have done, which is this episode is on the Italian literature and one of the classics. This is Alessandro Manzoni, The Betrothed, E Promessi Sposi.
Yep.
Which I think I was with Italians in Rome for a conference, a philosophers conference thing, and I think you have to pronounce it like "I promessi sposi." You know, they do what? They do a lot of gestures, gesticulating, and yeah.
I have theories about languages and language groups and language comportment, because to speak a language isn't simply to pronounce it, right, or to like master the vocabulary and grammar. There's also like a kind of zeitgeist. There's a spirit that goes with the language. Yeah. What I've noticed with Italian is that it's just ever so slightly aggressive. Not in a negative way, but it's like, it's the type of thing that you speak pitched forward.
And it's the type dramatic.
Of thing, yeah, and you come at the other person, which in the setting, in the context, it communicates a kind of like warmth and welcome, which I love, because it's like, it reminds me of living on the East Coast where everything's just like in your face.
You might communicate that to you if you were, I was at this conference and this man at some point it felt like it was an Italian Dominican, like he was shouting at some point.
Yeah.
Because, we must understand and appreciate the great Francisco Suarez. And I thought, we're just all sitting around presenting papers. Like there's no, why the drama? Yeah. But I think it's just their way, you know. They do kind of. So I appreciate that, and I will never hear nor pronounce Francisco Suarez's name without doing that. In fact, when I teach next year, I might just use that as just immediately break into great Francisco Suarez.
The Spanish Jesuit pronounced by an Italian, pronounced by an American. You have to give them the layers.
Yeah,
exactly.
Exactly, yeah. But anyway, we're not talking about Francisco Suarez, or not at least explicitly, but rather this man, Alessandro Manzoni, if I've got that, Manzoni, his book, The Betrothed, I Promessi Sposi, which is a classic in Italian literature, or so we're told by Google, and Pope Francis. He says he's read it 3 times, which may be more than most books that anyone read multiple times, and recommended to all couples. So let's just give a little background on Manzoni.
Hit us. Send it.
He is 1785 to 1873, an Italian writer. He's an interesting character, Catholic, of course, he's Italian, but had a reversion to Catholicism, very strong reversion in 1810, because his wife was a Calvinist, and she converted, I think, in 1808. And so she had this kind of profound effect on him. So ladies, you can indeed convert your husbands, but don't marry them thinking that you will. It's just possible. Yeah. Okay. And so he wrote this book, The Betrothed, in 1823 first, and then revised it because of some language things that I'm not clear. They were still debating what the right way of using Italian grammar was or something. And so he kind of set the standard in 1840 with some Florentine, I don't know, who cares. Do you know anything about this?
I've heard, I mean, so like there are a variety of ways in which to speak Italian, or there are a variety of languages on the Italian peninsula, but it's not until the 1870s that the Italian nation state is consolidated.
Yes.
And it's also because of like certain authors that the language takes the shape that it has now. So they make, certain judgments as to which dialect will reign supreme. Obviously, the Divine Comedy is the most significant landmark in Italian language formulation. St. Catherine of Siena's dialogue is also another thing that features into that conversation. But from what I understand, he made deliberate choices on the basis of the language as it was coalescing. So I think it's also part of the story of the nation state as it comes together.
He's responding to and also setting in. That's fair. Yeah. And he was particularly kind of a liberal figure, not in the sense of liberal as progressive, but liberal in the sense of political liberal, the kind of democratic feel of things, economically and otherwise. But a faithful man of the church, especially after 1810, such that Pope Pius XI quoted him in one of his encyclicals. So quoting like authors is not just a modern Franciscan or, Benedictine phenomenon, but actually like quotes him on the faith. So which is great.
Yeah.
But the book we read was Betrothed, which is kind of a love story in a fashion. It's long, real long, and it's got interesting parts. We'll talk about the themes. What were the first reactions on this thing? What did you think? What to make of it?
Yeah. I think so. We read a lot of contemporary literature, much of which is postmodern. And as a result of which, you're just so used to your palate getting cleansed that you forget what things taste like, if that makes sense. Like you forget what may have been cloying or saccharine of past ages. Like you forget what the first order discourse is because you live so much with the second order discourse.
Kind of brushing your teeth as opposed to eating something.
Yeah, exactly. You're just like downstream of nutrition. And so the thing about this book that struck me first was I was posing the question, is this book just overly earnest? Like,
didactic.
Yeah, didactic, kind of over the top, maybe perhaps a bit precious. Or is this just what literature is supposed to be?
Yeah.
And have we like grown weary of human discourse? And have we just spent the last 75 years running around in circles and wringing our hands and otherwise sighing unto death?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, my first reaction to the book was like, this is cute.
Yeah.
But then it just kind of worked on me over the course of the next 600 pages.
I think I think that's right. We'll end on returning again for the first time. And seeing it again, the unrealistic. I had unrealism or unrealistic sense because the part of it just seems a little precious is a good one too. Too cute, too like cut and dried, too simple. And I think you're right because you've been so used to eating bitter chocolate that when you have milk chocolate, you think this is too childish.
This is not 70% cacao.
Yeah, exactly. Although we had someone donated some like full 100% chocolate tablets, and you're supposed to put those in warm milk or something with sugar. And I didn't know that, so I just put one of these in my mouth. Wow, that is an experience and a half. That's desiccation of taste.
Exactly.
It was like eating chalk.
Evacuation of the will.
Yeah, it was incredible. Incredible. I should have tried milk chocolate right afterwards. I would have thought I was eating a pixie stick.
Exactly.
So anyway, so postmodern literature often has that sort of feeling. And there's something, I just think unrealistic, the events, the people, that kind of stuff.
You start with like well-coiffed bravos who waylay Don Abbondio or Abbondio. You know, it's just like, it's like, I'm sorry, we start with highwaymen who are known especially for their haircuts. It's like, okay, I guess we're doing this.
Yeah. And again, it's a long book. I'll say, and I'll ask you about we'll share some themes together about it, because there are a lot of themes in it. But one of the genre piece of it is, it feels a bit like, I don't know if you got this, it feels a bit like a modern kind of TV show drama in a way that like you're watching an event, and then all of a sudden a new character shows up and looks at the screen, and then this frame freezes, and then the narrator says, now, Don Abbondio was not exactly, and tells us backstory for a while.
This was not the first time that he had such thoughts.
Exactly. And then you tell a little bit of back, and because this book is history, it's the kind of the great man of history model. It's driven that history, it's an historical novel set in the plague time in Milan, 1628 through 30s, so it's those time period. This was set 200 years before it was written. But at the same time, anytime you meet a character, you get to hear their full story. And the characters, these people drive history. Whereas we're used to, again, to contrast it with today, we tend to think of, in our postmodern discourse, that like we're driven by events. Whereas this is an older school model of like, actually this man's decisive intervention here made a difference. But you're always meeting I always got this picture of the camera freezing for a second, and then like a flashback to something you're telling the story before then reinserting yourself back into the narrative itself. Yeah,
and I think it's something that we're going to return to, but as a result of which it gives you a thicker sense of agency. You kind of feel the freedom of the characters in a way that you don't in postmodern literature, like Infinite Jest, for instance. The two main characters, recovering alcoholic and amateur tennis guy, you don't really have the impression that there's much to be made of their choices. It's a matter of them like kind of ratifying where they find themselves or ratifying the circumstances in which they find themselves. And that's a kind of freedom, but it's paper thin. Whereas here, the sense of freedom is pretty thick. Like people choose for and against. They choose to love or not. They choose to live or die. And like conversion is possible and betrayal, like everything is possible. It's all on the table. Yeah. And how are we going to shoot? We're already so far in this episode and we haven't yet talked at all about what this book is about. So if people are like, what are you talking about? Because we have to tell something about the basic, but the book is so long. There's so many characters in it. Can you just give us a quick, maybe, Cliff Notes, 1 second, 1 minute survey of like what's the main events happening in this book, main story and the people, and then we can talk about a few themes or something before we get back. Main events in 60 seconds are there are two young people who love each other and want to get married, the betrothed. So on the one hand you have Renzo and then you have Lucia, and they make an effort to get married, but the guy who lives in the town where they are to be married, like the kind of count as it were, or duke, he is a lascivious, that's the word that I saved for this particular opportunity, and like power-hungry crazy dude. And so he wants to marry her. He's a malefactor. He wants to marry Lucia, and so he threatens the parish priest and says, you will not marry this couple or there will be serious consequences. And so then Renzo and Lucia approach the priest. He won't, perform the marriage. They try a bunch of different ways to get him to marry them, hijinksy type ways. But eventually both have to flee the city in different directions because, their lives are in danger and their potential love is threatened. And Renzo finds himself in a big city during plague time. He's accused of a crime. He has to flee subsequently and then work with his cousin. And then Lucia finds herself in a monastery where she's eventually handed over to her captor. And then her captor eventually converts, and then he wants to do good by her, and then they make their way back together.
And her captor is not the same man. So this is a man, unnamed man. It's not the malefactor of Milan.
But it's a guy who might hand her over to the malefactor if things go as the malefactor intends. But then they eventually find their way back together, and they eventually do get married.
Yeah, and the malefactor is converted by Cardinal Charles Borromeo's cousin, Federico Borromeo, who's an historical character. And there's also a Franciscan priest in there, Fra Cristoforo.
Yeah.
There's just a lot of characters. We haven't named all of them, but yeah. So they eventually, and they get back and all sorts of things. So it's kind of a long love story.
Yeah.
It's like, oh man, love in the time of cholera, but love in the time of Melanie's plague.
Yeah. Love in the time of buboes.
Buboes. Yeah, that's right. But around it has dealing some major themes about, of course, one that strikes me is the man and woman. Renzo is a kind of hothead sometimes, and he's just trying to always do things and be in charge of things, whereas Lucia is more passive, but not in the bad sense, because Renzo is always getting into trouble. Like whenever he's doing things, he's getting when his blood's up, and he's taking advantage of the mobs, or when he plans out his things, he's actually getting in trouble, and they'll continue to follow him and create serious problems for him actually getting married. So his decision to act is actually not helping his final end. Whereas Lucia has this more passive resolve to listen to the will of God, to trust in providence, this kind of thing. And in a sense, as long as she's on track with this, the book's going to be moving in the right direction. If Renzo's in charge of things, you have no idea where the book's going to end.
Yeah.
So the male-female complementarity, the differences about the kind of softness versus hardness, it's a beautiful image, and I think art at its best brings out more sensuously and more imaginatively and more physically, in a sense, true concepts of things. So man and woman here, I think, are presented in a particularly beautiful way.
Yeah, and I think that leads by interrelation of concepts to a kind of variegated vision of divine providence. So God disposes all things sweetly and strongly. He is the primary cause. We act as secondary causes. And you get a real sense of cause in Renzo and a real sense of secondary in Lucia, because Renzo is trying to seize life by the horns. He makes a mess of it, and yet you have a kind of thrill as you accompany him through the streets of Milan and then subsequently of Monta or wherever he ends up. Whereas with Lucia, she is more so abandoned to the providence of God. Like you said, she occupies a more passive role. But even that is a kind of exercise of agency, and you see the effect that it has, because the unnamed is, in fact, converted, or the seeds of his conversion are planted by her heart sickness, her heartbrokenness, right? Her desire to be reconciled with, or her desire to be reunited with Renzo, and her desire to escape anything that would, kind of defile her promise before God. So I think that reveals to us a kind of variegated vision of providence insofar as God acts in and through us, but it's something over which he has ultimate and final competence, to which we need abandon ourselves if we're going to, experience it in its fullness.
Yeah. Let's switch to, there's so many things to say about this book, and the more I talk about it, the more I think I actually really like this book.
Nice.
But maybe I'll say something good about the clerical state, and then you can say something poorly about the clerical state from this book. There's a via negativa and all of that. So the goodness is, we talked about the unnamed. So the unnamed, who is going to hand over Lucia to Don Rodrigo, the Duke, the nefarious character,
the malefactor,
of malefactors. This unnamed man is he's set up as this kind of cartoonish, vicious kind of guy who's, no heart, whatever. And Lucia is presented to him, and just her simplicity and her beauty and her gentleness of spirit causes something in him. She's not intending it, but it's like a seeds of grace, as you say, that then it has him go, and when he hears about Cardinal Borromeo coming through, he wants to go and meet with him. something. He's driven. He has the seed, so it's not a immediate conversion, but a sense of I've got to look further. And he goes to this cardinal, who then he pours out his heart to, and the cardinal is this incredible character who is historically accurate of going out in the plagues and going to places, visiting, and converts this man through his words and through his presence, using his priestly power, as far as I can tell, in the way it ought to be used, to bring people that otherwise would think they were better than others, to realize that even in their status of power, you can have power with a salvific and good, holy way. Maybe that's the part of the people always think, well, we shouldn't have a hierarchy and such, but there will always be hierarchies in the world. There will always be, leaders, barons, princes of the world. And the church, I think, in its hierarchy, at least as when it functions well, or it ought to, its cardinals and its bishops ought to be like stride for stride, matching the leaders of the world with, instead of just pure power politics and cynicism, but with grace and dignity and calling them out. And you see that in the cardinal. And it got me thinking again about, the hierarchy of the church and what cardinals and bishops ought to be and how they were in the past and such, and maybe some of them, of course, are. But and how we ought to support, at least as priests, we ought to support these missions because power only listens to power, even though it's a distinct kind of power, priestly, bishopric power as opposed to worldly power. So he's a great character in that, and this conversion happens, which I suppose we'll talk about in a minute. Whether your first reflection is there's no way an unnamed villain, would be converted by one like a beautiful Italian girl, but maybe I just don't see many Italian girls, and then like a cardinal, prince of the church. But we'll get in that second. But maybe do you want to talk about another aspect of clerical stuff during plague time?
Yeah, sure. I think,
or something else.
I think. It's a good question to pose because with the COVID pandemic, we all had an experience of this, the interruption of our sacramental life and a great sadness that kind of fell over the church, in the world entire as a result of which. And, I think here of John Mulaney's sketch regarding New York Post headlines. Like a hero in the New York Post lexicon is just anybody who does his job. Mm-hmm. So hero tutor, teaches after school. And we discovered in the pandemic what it means to be a hero priest is just to do your job. Hero priest celebrates mass,
Yeah.
And on the one hand, I say that by way of jest, but on the other hand, I say that by way of consolation because I think sometimes as a priest, you think I need to do all these extraordinary things if I'm going to acquit myself admirably of my duties. Like if I'm going to be like John Vianney or if I'm going to be like Saint, Dominic, I need to step
Gregory
up,
Pine
step
or something.
up.
Yeah,
nice, thanks.
Yeah.
But it turns out in order to be a good priest, you just need to do your job.
Yeah.
And I don't say that by way of like, let's just flatten this all to the imminent frame and just say there's nothing transcendent about it. But I think that it's just a matter of showing up for Christ and showing up for your people day in and day out. It's boring at times, right? It's laborious at times, but it's the simple work of Christian conversion. And I think you see the way in which like Don Abundio, however you pronounce his name, he defaults on that because he won't celebrate the sacrament because he's afraid. And he is kind of enslaved to his housekeeper, or whatever her name is, Perpetua or something like that, right? Because he can't stand up for himself, because he can't actually project an identity and a vision for what lies in store, because he doesn't know who he is, because he doesn't know who he is before the Lord. And so he's looking to escape punishment and make money and carve a way forward for himself because he's lost sight of his priestly identity and mission. But in order to reclaim that, all you have to do is just you pray, right? And you celebrate the sacraments and you preach and teach with a modicum of competence. It doesn't have to be that great.
Yeah.
Like I experienced this somewhat in Switzerland, not to say, bad things of the clergy in Switzerland, but it seems that people there don't have much in the way of sacramental administration, preaching and teaching, et cetera. So when you show up and you're like, hey, what if we had mass and then a talk and then I answered questions and people are like, oh my God.
Sure. Yeah. And also, I think there's an element of, it's kind of like Graham Greene's, the Whiskey Priest and Power and the Glory. There's an element of sometimes showing up and doing your job actually is heroic in the sense that there are forces that would want you not to do that. Yeah. So obviously, we have to bring prudence. There's a book over there about prudence sort of thing, about like when to kind of fly in the face of political opposition and such. But if it's like in this case, these people have the right to marriage. It's a good thing that these people are married. Therefore, it is the priest's job to marry them when they present themselves to it, regardless of the consequences. He's worried about his life and his own skin, but it's not asking him to do anything particularly impressive other than the fact to do his job, which might lead to him being uncomfortable. Yeah. And I think in the same way that the priesthood, it's not doing the sacraments, nothing particularly heroic about it, but it might, unfortunately, in some situations, have to demand you to go in the face of something, but it's just doing what you were called to do. Yeah. The other thing I was thinking about this is the happy endings part. So we talked about, I think we're swinging here to the kind of concluding thoughts, that this, you could see this book as a sort of, classic journey of tragedy, but then leading to good. So it's got, the start, that there's a problem to be solved, there's protagonist, antagonist, and there's a journey and blah, blah, blah. And then at the end, don't worry, it resolves nicely and sort of thing. We have a climax at some point and then you have a kind of a downslide to once you realize they're going to be, so when they meet up at a lazaretto and such, okay, they're going to get married, it'll be fine. And then you just slide down, everything's happily ever after. And you might think this is too much, too simple, not enough bitter chocolate. But the book actually doesn't end with everything perfect. Their marriage is still there because of Renzio's past and his political involvement. He's actually not fully appreciated in the town. They have to move because it's like they don't appreciate him. Like they don't trust him. This sort of thing. His past still sticks with him. So it's not like happily ever after entirely. Nor you obviously think at some point the Duke, so Rodrigo. Well, obviously, he's going to convert too. And eventually you find him in a lazaretto. He's got the plague himself. And you think, okay, he's going to convert. But it's not clear that he does, but it's also not clear that he doesn't. There are sort of loose ends there. So it's more, and that, I haven't studied the composition of this. Maybe that's just because he ran out of time. But I like to think that it's chosen that there are loose ends to this such that life can be good and is good, and yet not perfect, and so it mitigates to me a little bit of the potential for charm, the kind of pure charminess and simplicity. And that actually, I just imposed on this thing a framework of didactic moralism and kind of exhortation and exemplification of particular morals. So that my response to this thing was different as I kind of thought more about it and realized actually, yeah, it's not a simple book, Did you get a changing perspective? Did you, or were you just kind of similar, or what do you have to say about it? Is it complex, simple, both? Is it helpful? Is it our fault that we don't think this is that we don't think this is a serious book, or is it its fault?
Yeah, no, I think there are parts of it, genre-wise, that make it hard for us as a modern audience to enter into it. But I think that when you do begin to enter into it, you appreciate it. And I think we can return here to Hemingway, which was one of the first literature episodes that we did in just around the year mark of Godsplaining. But Hemingway says that it's the job of the author to tell the truth. It's the job of the writer to tell the truth. And I think that there are different ways of falsifying. On the one hand, you can do things a little too picture perfectly, and it falsifies because it gives you to believe that all ends not only right in the end, but kind of this worldly good in the end, and the kind of classic Hallmark Christmas movie type indulgence. And I think you see that in certain authors. And I think it's a kind of weakness on their part, like a constitutional weakness that can't bear up the difficulty of life while reconciling it to the providence of God and a vision of glory. So like Dickens, I think, can be this way sometimes. And Chesterton accuses Dickens of this because, and David Copperfield, for instance, Dickens, who has serialized the story, had David Copperfield, the protagonist, marry Dora. And then he realized at the end that he had him marry the wrong woman. So he just kills her. And then he has him marry Agnes because he knew that was a better solution. But it's just like, you can't just kill your wife and marry another. That's an impediment in canon law. Even as an author, though, you need to recognize the fact that you might marry the wrong person, but that's the first principle of marriage. You're bound to marry the wrong person. What matters is what you do subsequently.
Yes.
And I think in Manzoni, you see something of the complexity of human life, and there's a kind of devastation in every human story, not to be too dramatic about it, but then the question is, how do you build back, or how do you build up, or how do you build out? How do you proceed from here?
Given this, let's move forward. Yeah.
Rather than erase the past, make it as if it were not, because that's a metaphysical impossibility which God doesn't indulge in, so yeah.
I have to say, it did help me. So the conversion of the unnamed and I thought initially, this is so silly. And I realized it was one of those reflective moments. I thought, well, people do convert.
They do.
Like even seriously evil people do convert if Christ matters, and if you present, so like this poor girl, and then the cardinal, Cardinal Borromeo, if you present Christ in a particular way, is it a foregone conclusion that this will do nothing against power, political power, and worldly power, that they are not human? And I thought to myself, I'd set it up because of the caricature, and this maybe I thought Manzoni was too simple. I thought this was black hats, white hats kind of stuff, and therefore was saying, well, this is silly. You can't have a black hat turn to white hat immediately. But actually, maybe Manzoni was having them wear grayish hats right off the bat, and I had projected this because of my cynicism about the witness of Christ in the modern world, and that I should say, actually, if I live like this, and this cardinal, there's no reason to think that you can't convert some people through the grace of God and His working, and you're presenting yourself as an image of Christ in this particular way. So it kind of cut me to the heart about my kind of cynicism and nihilism. It won't do anything to change it, I don't think. But at least it presented an opportunity, an occasion for such change and conversion in a named man instead of an unnamed one. Yeah.
Perhaps you too may meet a Federico Borromeo. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, it'd be so great. Might be sitting across from one. That's it, folks. Thanks for listening to this episode of Godsplaining. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or anything else that Elon Musk owns. Maybe a spaceship. Like, subscribe, leave a 5-star review. If you'd like to donate, give, tithe, whatever, to the podcast through Patreon, please do follow the link in the description. You can also follow us, the links in the description, to shop our Godsplaining merch with hopefully soon Hold My Kappa merchandise. We're going in. And to get information on upcoming events, Godsplaining events, which I want to raise 2 here. No, 2 or just 1?
2, yeah.
2. Final week for the Brevard, North Carolina men's retreat. So this is for men. To do climbing and things and active life stuff. So manly things, but you can, as long as you're a man, you can come in certain age groups, I suspect. Whatever. Check on that. This is the last chance. If you haven't signed up, you probably signed up. It's a great opportunity in mid-August to do that. Finally, the Young Adults Retreat is going to be in Malvern, Pennsylvania. So it's going to be November 3rd through the 5th. Please join us there. Actually, that's Charles Borromeo's feast day on the 4th, right?
Party on.
Yeah, so there we go. Come and join us there if you'd like to get away. If you're young adults from 21 to 33, there's information to sign up there, and we'd love to have you. So please pray for us, know of our prayers for you, and we'll catch you next time on Godsplaining.